Okay, it's September 15th, 2024. I'm with the second segment of reading Mr. John J. Jeckovich's book, Their Mother's Sons. And this is, I believe it's a 331 docuseries. And we're on page 17, and that's titled
Renee.
News of Renee's Tragic Death. And Mr. Jeckovich was from Company H, 2nd Battalion, 291st Regiment of the 75th Infantry Division of the U.S. Army during World War II. Mr. Jeckovich received the Purple Heart and 2 Bronze Stars. We were just talking about in the last segment about not going to buildings during the Battle of the Bulge.
Yeah.
And what was the main reason again?
The Germans would zero in on the building. If they followed us around, they knew if they knew we went in the building, they blow it up.
And so you're better off
wandering around, yeah.
Staying in the cold.
Yeah.
Staying in the cold. And your frostbite trench foot is still bothering you.
Well, that was my fault. I used to wear the wet socks. I should have kept socks open.
Yeah.
I didn't have 2 or 3 pair of socks.
Yeah. So, another question was pertaining, you and many young American soldiers freed the POWs and the Holocaust victims. And what was your orders not to do when you freed them?
What,
the
prisoner of war?
Yeah.
Don't feed them.
Don't feed them. Why is that?
Because their stomachs, their system isn't used to it. You'll kill them. You'll kill them.
And some strange people today think the Holocaust was a hoax. They're denying.
Come on.
What do you say about those people? What do you say about that?
They're ones writing the books.
Yeah. Did you ever, I know Patton, his whole goal in life at the time was to meet face to face.
Right.
Patton's whole goal back then was to meet face to face with Hitler, but he was never able to.
No.
Could you imagine with Patton's huge ego if he was the one to meet face to face with Hitler?
He'd probably shoot him.
Of course he would.
Pull his silver pearl rifle, I would shoot him.
Yeah, well,
With a Bronze Star for it.
Yeah. I'm going to pick up a little bit about Adolf Hitler to many of these foolish people that are non-believers that Mr. Jeckovich has information on. Adolf Hitler, on April 20th, 1889, was born in a very small village in Bavarian border. A child born, he was destined to preside over one of the most evil periods of history mankind has ever experienced. He would become the dictator of Germany for a little over 12 years.
Yeah.
On his orders, 6 million
Jews.
European Jews were murdered. So these people that think it's a hoax, you're foolish too. Murdered along with thousands of communist, gypsies, homosexuals, and mentally and physically impaired. The tyrant Hitler also plunged into the world into a war in which over 40 million men, women, and children lost their lives. Half of them were civilians. In short, if ever a nightmare took the shape of a man, Adolf Hitler was it.
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting? Supposedly such a smart man, but very evil. He didn't make it to 56 years old.
Oh.
Hitler is dead at 56.
Yeah.
Your mother actually was born in 1899, and Hitler was born in 1889. Isn't that something? As a young boy, Hitler did not enjoy most of a stable childhood. Hitler's father, Alois Hitler, was a customs official, a cog in a very large wheel, someone who suffered from huge inferiority complex. He had been married twice, that's Hitler's father, bearing 3 children, before he met Adolf Hitler's mother, Clara Pulse, who was 23 years his junior. So Hitler's father married a lady that was 23 years his junior. The age gap led Hitler's father to treat his new wife with contempt, and when Adolf Hitler was a young boy, he witnessed his father's boorish, violent behavior on more than one occasion. So now, the next wife of Hitler's father was just a young girl. Mm-hmm. And Adolf Hitler would witness his father beat her up and doing horrible things to her. So maybe this is the beginning of his demented personality. Okay, Adolf Hitler was a young boy. He witnessed his father's boorish and violent behavior on more than one occasion. Adolf Hitler, fiercely protecting of his mother, Adolf felt unable to go to her aid and left him feeling vulnerable and inadequate. So it goes on and on. What a miserable life Adolf Hitler had. He had a miserable life. And then, without reading too much of his about his life, we know he is a miserable, horrible person. There's no excuses for his behavior. But then I'm going to pick up going to the Holocaust questions. In effect, what was meant was by the time World War II began, not only the policies had been put in operation which foreshadowed the Holocaust, but to all intents and purposes, the operational infrastructure was already in existence with which to carry out killings. Hitler, here we go. Hitler was a deceitful on an international stage, and he was also despicable in his domestic arena. So he was bad internationally and at home.
Yeah. He was a British personality.
Yeah. While voicing his determination for peace to the Allied leaders, and in particular the British Prime Minister, Chamberlain, Hitler ruthlessly invaded 3 countries. So he's telling everyone he wants peace at the same time.
He's the one stirring them up.
Yeah. Smiling faces, there we go. Hitler ruthlessly invaded 3 countries in March of 1938. German troops marched into Austria, and by the 13th of March it was announced the country would be united with its German neighbor. It never happened. Yeah. Next, Hitler turned his attention to Sutherland, which was united with Germany. On October 1st, 1938, and finally the troops marched into the Czech Republic, which fell victim to the same annexation processed in the 15th of March 1939. Where would Hitler's attention turn next? So he's just like taking over all these cities, brutal murders. Yeah. This was a question on everyone's lips. The question was occupied every politician across Europe. Would it be Holland or Switzerland or perhaps Hungary or Poland Hitler would take next? In the event, it turned out to be Poland. There you go. He destroyed Poland. On the 1st of September 1939, Hitler's troops invaded Poland. And on September 3rd, Britain and France declared war on Germany. So, when Hitler kept on marching into these other countries, finally, in 1939, after Hitler took over Poland, finally, Britain and France declared war on Germany. We still were on a Lend-Lease program, which we basically we're supplying our allies with equipment, but we're not with men at this time.
Lend-Lease.
Yeah. We wouldn't supply them with men, but we gave them lots of military equipment.
Yeah.
We were staying out, and actually, the only way we got involved was 2 years later, when on December 7th, 1941, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. Then it was all-out war. That anything would be going on. But up to this point, when we were on all-out war, General Patton was chomping at the bit. He wanted this thing bad. He didn't want to sit back and watch this. He didn't want to sit back, and I hope we never sit back and watch again. In the initial stages of conflict, Germany was triumphant. After Poland Hitler sent trips to the Netherlands, Norway, Belgium, Denmark, Luxembourg, and France. Now there we go, France. Hitler occupied France for 4 years.
Yeah.
And then you and several other combat soldiers kicked Hitler's ass out of France.
Yeah.
And that's where you met Rene. That's how it's going full circle. We're talking about Rene's death that went from a nun to the French resistance. Minutes, please?
19.
Okay, so now we're going full circle. We're getting to this chapter, why we're here. At the time, with the world attention preoccupied with fighting the Germans, all these different fronts, Hitler turned his mind to a Chile became known as a final solution. So Hitler's fighting with everybody at this time.
Yeah.
He is fighting with everybody. That's the results of a sick mind. Ever since he assumed his position as Chancellor of Germany, the Jews have been deprived of more and more rights.
Yeah.
Now we're working our way up to the Holocaust. People think it's a sham.
Yeah, with a thing on her shoulder.
And many of them were tattooed.
Yeah.
Many of them are tattooed. And they're okay, here we go. Now for these people think Holocaust is a hoax, do your homework, don't be stupid. Their movements had been restricted. Now we're restricting every one of these Jewish people. Their movements would be restricted. No, Hitler's restricting. We're not. These movements of these Jewish people. Hitler turned his mind towards Chile to be known as a final solution. Ever since he assumed the position of Chancellor of Germany, the Jews have been deprived of more and more rights. Their movements had been restricted. They were made to wear a Star of David with a yellow background with the word Jude in the center. Jews, okay, here we go. Jews were banned from public transport and not allowed to use public telephone booths, and they were marked "Use by Jews forbidden." So now it's really getting nasty. Humiliation after humiliation was heaped upon, but the invasion of Poland, a new horror emerged. Suddenly Jews, so after he took over Poland, then it really got disgusting. It really got nasty. It really got nasty. Once he took over Poland, a new horror emerged. Suddenly Jews were being transported to labor camps where they quite literally worked to death.
Yeah.
Worked to death.
Up north.
Yeah, work them to death. When they can't function, they can't walk, blow their brains out.
Yeah.
That's what you do. He was a total animal. He was the most evil person in the world, but we have more today, but he was evil at that time. We have more today. And so let's just see. So this is horrible. When they went to labor camps, they were worked to death. There was no giving them a break. There was zero giving them a break. They worked them to death. Life expectancy, oh, this is interesting. Life expectancy was 6 weeks to 3 months, a figure that didn't include those who were committed to suicide or died in accidents. So a lot of them died in accidents because they were in unsafe conditions, or many of them just killed themselves. So their life wasn't long, 3 months when they got to those labor camps. Boy. Yet for Hitler, working the Jews into a grave was not quick enough method of disposing of what he called vermin. He therefore ordered the SS, which is like the worst group of people in the world. They are below the step of nasty animals, SS. And there was a lot of SS. He especially chosen the elite force of soldiers to experiment, now they experiment on the Jews, with different gases ranging from carbon dioxide to cyanide. The first gas chamber to be built at Brandenburg in 1939.
Yeah.
So he didn't waste any time. It was erected as an experiment to see how effective the gas chambers were, and 4 insane men were its first victims. So he found 4 mentally ill men, which wasn't hard to do, and he used them as their victims. It was erected as an experiment to see how effective the different gases were, and they first used it on foreign sent men were its first victims. Therefore, the gas chambers were constructed at Hitler's euthanasia program, killing many, the old, and the sick and the needy. Finally, after Hitler's invasion of Poland, this program ran parallel to that of the Final Solution. That was his name of his terms, Final Solution. And apart from a personnel who changed from camp to camp and perhaps seized the killing chambers, the same methods and equipment were used in both. At Auschwitz in Poland, 4 huge chambers were built. 4 huge chambers were built at Auschwitz, which could hold 2,000 people at a time. Could you imagine? The victors were made to strip and then herded inside, which point the doors were sealed shut, and the gas was pumped in. It could take up to 15 minutes. 15 minutes for the victims to die, depending on where they stood in the crush. It was assembly line genocide, although hundreds of thousands of people on both sides of this conflict lost their lives in various ways during the war. Nothing compared to the cruelty and the inhuman treatment this particular killing program, ranging from special actions to major cleansing actions, making free appropriate treatment in order to soften the reality of what was occurring. So they put some nice terms on what Hitler was doing. They called it special actions, major cleaning actions, making free. So they made it sound like it was something civilized, but it was totally inhumane. There were 8,860,800 Jews in the countries of Europe, directly or indirectly, under the Nazi control. Of these, it was calculated that the Nazis killed 5,933,900, or the Nazis killed approximately 67% of all Jews. Over the 2 million Jews were killed in Auschwitz, 1.4 million at Majdan, 800,000 at Treblinka, and 600,000 at Belzec, 340,000 at Kemlo, and 240,000 at Sobibor. In addition to the work camps were killing them just as fast as...
Give the details of what you remember seeing.
Of the gas chambers. Hitler was sanctioned. Okay, here it comes. Really, so these guys were in pretty bad shape when you seen them, right?
Yeah.
Horrible shape. And I remember quite clearly what you're telling me when you liberated a camp and the SS's were primarily in the office and they ran like little rats from a sinking ship. And there was like 70,000 SS during the war. And they all denied being SS when the war was ending. But these offices that the SS and their secretaries
evacuated.
But the offices were nice. And like 25 yards out were the death camps where these prisoners lived, 50 and 60 pounds. And the secretaries were living a good life. They were eating everything they get their hands on. And I know these secretaries were named, these German secretaries, and they're still prosecuting them today, even at 99 years old. These secretaries, as they were accomplices to the torture of these soldiers, they were directly accomplices. They were nicknamed fat fucks. Fat fucks. Because here they're eating themselves and eating all the finest food when these young men are 50, 60 pounds. So what you guys did when you took over these camps, you took these fat secretaries and made you help them move out some of the dead soldiers that were just lying in their bunk, and also help them take some of the soldiers who were still alive to Red Cross wagons and trucks to get them out of there. So, karma's a bitch. These fat fucks didn't have a nice life at the end. I'm sure There's nothing we can talk about now, but I'm sure they didn't end nicely, I can tell you that. They were nasty, cold-hearted people. So here we go, stuff just to add more about Hitler to all these people that have no idea how horrible it was. And words can't describe it. I'm just touching on some information that Mr. Jeckovich knows about, but we're not going into all the details. But in addition to the work camps, which you worked to death, and gas chambers, Hitler also sanctioned medical experiments of Jews. The doctors involved, this came out in the Nuremberg trials, the doctors involved weren't allowed to use any type of painkillers or anesthetics. And their testimonies heard, actually, here we go, at the Nuremberg trials, they were either oblivious to the pain being caused, or worse, these Nazi doctors enjoyed seeing their victims suffer. As victims suffers. And there's many horrible things they did, like took their skin and made out of lampshades. But here's some of the things that they did to these poor people. The medical experiments included patients being subjected to freezing temperatures so that they froze to death. That's just pure torture. Alternately, some were exposed to such intense air pressure they put pressure, blow up in their mouth, and it'd blow out. Their lungs would burst. Horrible son of a bitches. Patients were injected. They injected these patients with various diseases in order to see how long it took them to die without medication. There were also reports of some men being castrated. I wouldn't doubt that one single bit. To add to the inhumanity of all the ordeals the Jews, gypsies, the communists experienced. So now after they killed them, they were dead. These Nazis, these dirty bastards, they would take out their gold fillings from their teeth, or their wedding rings, and other jewelry would be collected and later melted down into gold bars. I'm sure there's a lot of gold bars still hitting that no one knows where they're at. They have no idea. Maybe 100 or 200 years someone will stumble upon them. Minutes, please.
7.
So we're just winding down with this question that Mr. Jeckovich was having, being the Holocaust wasn't real. But even though the camps such as Auschwitz succeeded in gassing thousands of Jews per day, even this tally wasn't fast enough for the Nazi killing machine, and orders were given that mass shootings would take place. Again, in the later Nuremberg trials, highly emotional evidence was given by eyewitnesses who saw what had occurred. In a final speech by Britain's chief prosecutor, Sir Hartley, later to become Lord Shawgrass, one of the accounts of the mass extermination of Jews, Hitler's special forces, was read out loud, who was one of those trial to reveal that it haunted him for the rest of his life. Yeah, I hope so. Without screaming or weeping, these people undressed, stood around in family groups, kissed each other and said their farewells, and waited for a sign from another SS man who stood near a pit with a whip in his hand. During the 15 minutes I stood nearby, I heard no pleas for mercy. I watched a family of about 8 people, a man and a woman about 50, with 2 daughters of about 20 to 24, and boys about 1, 8, and 10. The couple were looking on with tears in their eyes. Their father was holding the hand of a boy about 10 years old, speaking to him softly. The boy was fighting his tears. Then I heard a series of shots. I looked into the pit and saw that their bodies were twitching or lying motionlessly on top of those before them. Blood was running from their necks. Now this is documentation from the Nuremberg trials. This is facts. After the war ended, the German people, including those who lived closest to the camps, they denied any knowledge of what had happened on their doorstep. They denied it. They denied it. For over 900,000 Germans, okay, listen, 900,000 Germans belonged to the SS alone, into which no one could miss the huge numbers of Jews being transported to camps and railways. So they knew it. They knew it. They were just denying it. And finalized this. Most of them ran like scared dogs, these SS. And so finally, Hitler was looking for the scorched earth policy for Germany. He commanded was to reduce the land to ashes. Hitler wanted to burn everything down to the ground. Hitler wanted to burn everything down to the ground at the end of the war. He wanted everything destroyed, bridges, factories, dams, railroad, and if anyone refused to comply, they were shot on sight. They were shot on sight. Albert Speer did his best to sabotage the plans, and in many respects succeeded, submitted to altering the Führer's orders. Meanwhile, Hitler grew isolated and increasingly desperate. In the beginning of April, he was no longer able to keep much with his generals, and though Germans continued to fight, in particular to the east, there was no organization. They were doing no doubt because their efforts were futile. So people were just falling apart. Even the generals didn't want to do nothing with him. Because the guy was raving mad. He was raving mad. And to finalize this, the Russians were now in the city where Hitler was. This is not going to be good for Hitler. The Russians were now in the city where Hitler was. And the Russians now in the city, bombs were being dropped night and day with no hope left for Hitler. Meeting was convened and with which it decided on a mass suicide. Now he's got only one way out. Still, Hitler had one last surprise up his sleeve. On the morning of April 29th, he decided to reward one member of his remaining group, particularly honor Eva Braun. And always wanted to marry Hitler. Who would want to marry that son of a bitch? And now she was to have her way. Eva Braun had always wanted to marry Hitler. She was so fucking sick as him. And now she was to have her way. Between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m., a brief civil wedding took place in a bunker map room. And then after that, everyone committed suicide. Hitler shot himself, and Eva Braun took cyanide. Minutes?
About 3 minutes.
So finally, Hitler's body was, according to his detailed instruction, he had left for its disposal, was to be carried outside the Chancellery Garden and laid alongside that of Eva Braun, and was poured over gallons and gallons of gasoline on both corpses and set afire. What happened to their ashes, no one ever knew. Their ashes were even gone. But that the Third Reich was itself reduced to a silver state shortly after Hitler's death in a matter of historical record. For on May 7th, General Alfred Jody, together with Admiral von Freyberg, signed an unconditional surrender of all German forces, which then presented to the USA, Great Britain, France, and the USSR. So that's the end of a maniac. Oh, he killed millions of people.
Then they went to court.
Yeah, well, he's a coward. He shot himself. So you remember all that? That's those camps, those death camps. And so getting back to that text, that person was very foolish to say there was no Holocaust. So I had to read it to him. You got to be so foolish for people to think that way, don't you agree?
Well, they do in the European countries now, those small countries now. They do the same things now. They're killing those people, torturing them and everything else.
Yeah. Minutes?
Nobody learned anything. Nobody learned anything.
Yeah.
30 seconds.
World War I was supposed to be the war to end war.
Shit.
You know, we got more wars now than ever, don't you think, Mr. Jeckovich? Huh? Well, God bless them all. God bless them all.
15.
What's all their relatives doing now? the Eva Braun and Hitler and all they gotta have passports somewhere in the line.
Somewhere it's gotta be, but no one's admitting it.